Welcome to episode 32 of Full Throttle, the Presidio Group's automotive industry podcast. I'm your host, Jason Stein, Director of Multimedia and Events at Presidio. On a regular basis, Full Throttle serves as the industry's meeting point for great conversations with leaders across the automotive world.
But the Chinese clearly have leapfrogged in some ways in terms of critical minerals that are needed to make batteries, in terms of some technology, the connectivity world, which is so important. So they are real competitors for sure, and they're going to be competitors in various marketplaces. And of course, you see Vice President Harris and former President Trump talking about major tariffs on Chinese EVs, which is just one example of kind of how these tectonic plates are shifting in the days ahead.
There are few who can carry the label of industry legend as well as Mack McLarty can. With a career as varied as it is distinguished, he sits at the center point of all things political, economic, dealer-related, and larger. His social circles are the who's who of the industry and the political world. It isn't just his former role as chief of staff to President Clinton that carries so much gravitas. It's the fact that his firm is involved in diplomatic solutions and dealerships. As chairman of McLarty Associates, which he co-founded in 1998 following a distinguished record of business leadership and public service, including various roles advising 3 U.S. presidents, Mack leads a team that is involved in many aspects of commerce and distinguished service. Mack's resume is the stuff of business legend. Prior to his government service, he was chairman and chief executive officer of Arkla, a Fortune 500 natural gas company. During his time there, it grew into the nation's largest natural gas distributor, with customers in 11 states and significant exploration and pipeline operations. Mack McLarty was appointed by President Bush to the National Petroleum Council and the Council on Environmental Quality, and he was a member of the St. Louis Federal Reserve Board from 1989 through 1992. Today, we talk all things industry, politics, and even a bit of his own view on the importance of the dealer body. Having just returned from the United Nations, it's Mack McLarty on Full Throttle.
Hi, I'm Mack McLarty, and I'm delighted to be on Presidio Full Throttle podcast.
What a pleasure to be joined by an absolute legend. And it's a pleasure for me personally because it probably goes back, almost 2 decades in terms of time that we have spent together, recording various things, being on stage. But I've never been where he was last week and or just recently. But we'll begin by saying hello to you, Mack. Thanks for being on the program.
Jason, it's always a treat. I look forward to being with you, and we have had a long run at it, and it's been a good one. And likely we've got passages ahead, including this podcast.
That's right, we do. Tell us where you were recently, which I think is so fascinating, and we should have hosted this conversation there.
Well, I've been delighted to have you. You would have fit right in with your diplomatic skills. I had the pleasure and privilege to participate for a couple of days in the United Nations General Assembly meeting. It's a gathering of the world leaders. It has a chaotic feel to it with all the heads of state there, all the security, particularly after 9/11, of course, in New York City at the United Nations. But it does underscore how interconnected the world is, and what happens over there matters here, and what happens here matters over there. I had the privilege of meeting with a number of leaders, including the first time I had met with President Zelensky of Ukraine, which was inspiring, and I had known the ambassador here well. So it was a rich opportunity to discuss the important issues today, including the world economy, including the serious security issues we have, particularly in the Middle East and Ukraine and Russia, climate change, how to address that in a responsible way, which fits right into the automotive sector, among many other issues, including women's issues and concerns about those less fortunate around the world, and developing countries and kind of the balance of powers around the world. So we could go on, but let's stick to the car business primarily in this podcast. I'll follow your lead, Jason.
Yeah, I was going to say there probably wasn't enough time to discuss the number of issues in the world, but let's focus in on climate change and the fact that there's been such a tumultuous back and forth going on within the industry related to EVs, hybrids, internal combustion engine vehicles.
Right.
What is your takeaway coming out of the UN and as it relates to climate change and where the auto industry is today?
Well, it's a big question. We could talk about it a long time. I think the headlines are number one, climate change is real and we've got to address it, but we've got to address it in a responsible, thoughtful, serious, informed manner. And we've got to realize, I think, Jason, no one has a monopoly on wisdom in this field, as is usually the case in many of the major challenges and opportunities before us. So you have to be a good listener and take into account the other person's point of view. And Jason, also it varies. It's all where you sit at the table, as the old saying goes, and it varies whether you're a developed country like the United States or Europe, whether you're a strongly developing country and rising like China, or whether you're an emerging market developing country such as in Africa and other parts of the world. So it will affect you and the people that you as a leader represent, which you, of course, have to fully take those views into account. My view on electric vehicles, and I have followed it very closely. I'd like to think I'm informed. I've certainly spent enough hours studying it and reading about it and talking with others, including Mark and Franklin among industry leaders and other dealers. I'm in the evolutionary camp, not revolutionary. I think EVs have a place. Obviously, Elon Musk with Tesla has forged out a unique standing in the industry, including the charging infrastructure. We could talk a long time, and I think you and Mark actually did, about China and the dramatic rise of EVs there, which are 60% of the market, Jason, in China. China is the largest automotive market in the world, as you know. So that's a significant development. You now have China with excess capacity looking to export not only their EVs, but other makes and models of their vehicles. But I think when you really get to the bottom line, despite the tremendous capital investments that the established OEMs have made, you still, Sam Walton's rule number one, the customer's always right.
Right.
And you have to follow the customer lead. And I think that's where the development of EVs or the marketing of it got a bit ahead of the market, of the customer. We're now seeing that recalibrated. And I think a better understanding of all the consequences and challenges here involved in this transformation. So I think there's a lot of different approaches, including plug-in hybrids, including more fuel-efficient automobiles and cars and trucks. But I think this needs to be a step-by-step process that's taken with real care and thought.
Are we leaders as either consumers or from a technology perspective, or are we laggards in America relative to the peers that you have in other countries?
Yeah, that's a Jason Stein question for sure. That's a good one. It's insightful. I think both, frankly, and I say that seriously. I think the United States has certainly been a leader in the automotive industry, but we have seen certainly our friends, partners, and competitors, depending on where, again, you sit in that relationship, in Europe, particularly the Germans, the South Koreans, and certainly the Japanese many years ago when they first started selling their cars and trucks, at that time cars primarily initially, in the United States. So I think the United States still has a strong position in technology, a strong position in manufacturing, a skill, a branding, a styling, just kind of that U.S. nameplate that's still very special. I think the OEMs, particularly from Asia and Europe, who have made major investments in the United States, are very much an American company in that sense, with an American workforce and American leadership. But the Chinese clearly have leapfrogged in some ways in terms of critical minerals that are needed to make batteries, in terms of some technology, the connectivity world, which is so important. So they are real competitors for sure, and they're going to be competitors in various marketplaces. And of course, you see Vice President Harris and former President Trump talking about major tariffs on Chinese EVs, which is just one example of kind of how these tectonic plates are shifting in the days ahead.
You brought it up, so let's continue on it. The election and the impact of the election on, a couple of key elements: EVs in terms of government incentives,
Right.
infrastructure, which continues to be
Right.
a hot point on chicken and eggs with the chicken and the egg with EV adoption,
Right.
general adoption, and Chinese tariffs.
Right.
So you think about those three different buckets and what's going to happen post November. What do you see in the Mack McLarty crystal ball, and how each of those areas will be affected? And again, it's another very big question.
Well, my wonderful wife of 50 plus years, Donna, might say my crystal ball is not always right. I would start with that caveat. Number two, Jason, I knew you were going to bring up the political landscape, so I thought I would kind of beat you to it or inoculate myself here a bit. And I was glad you were talking about chickens and eggs and so forth, and using kind of a Southern formulation in your podcast here as a very distinguished urbane Canadian. So it all kind of pleased me. So to get down to the serious matters that you raised, many political observers have commented this is a hinge election, as they've called it. It takes on more importance and significance than even any presidential election is an important one, but this one particularly so. And I think that's actually not an overstatement or too dramatic. I think it's an important election in so many ways. Our country's more divided than any of us would like to see. I think much of that division is not real in many ways. It exists for sure, but to me, as I am in our leaderships and travel the country, we just got so much more as a country that unites us than divides us. And while none of us are perfect as human beings, we've got a lot of very, very good and decent and hardworking people in this country that naturally are going to have different feelings about baseball teams, football teams, religion, politics, and candidates, and makes of cars and trucks. That's just kind of what makes America a free country and a great country. I think as far as the policies on EVs and tariffs, the easier one to answer, and that is that right now both President Biden, former President Trump, Vice President Harris, as an extension of the Biden administration, are clearly in favor of tariffs that would make it difficult for Chinese OEMs to export and sell in the United States at the moment. And I think there's frankly a pretty significant or bipartisan consensus in the Congress supporting that as well, of Republicans and Democrats. China has moved to, a very formidable place in terms of a competitor, and you, of course, have other national security interests that have to be taken into consideration as well. That's number one. As far as the EV policy, President Trump has been somewhat outspoken on it. I think he's not ruled out EVs. In fact, he's developed apparently a friendship with Elon Musk, who's supporting him, and he's made note of that. Harris has been a little less strident on the issue in her campaign commentary to date. Clearly, she's on record about some of the policies of the Biden-Harris administration. By the same token, I think she's making a serious effort to engage in Michigan and Pennsylvania and other key states that have fundamental interest in the automotive sector. So I really expect some balance or some responsiveness and engagement by either candidate or by both candidates, former President Trump or Vice President Harris. I think, Jason, what's important here, not to get on a soapbox, but I feel so strongly about it, and it goes to the heart of the issue. If you think about our automobile industry, and our family's been fortunate to be a participant for over 100 years, and I think dealers around the country just have such a commitment, of heartfelt dedication to this industry and passion for it. But we do indeed provide basic transportation for so many Americans, and it's at the heart of the fabric of this country, particularly in the heartland, but really more broadly as well in urban areas too, that you cannot conduct your lives without basic transportation, which we provide, and proudly so, and are grateful for that opportunity. But whether it's to get your kids to school, get to the doctor, see your mother, go to church, go to work, I mean, it is just a basic fundamental fabric of American life. And I would hope and believe that both candidates and both parties recognize that.
One more election question, then I promise we'll get to more cars. Given the tumultuous cycle, what will it take to get back to election rhetoric that features human decency, respect, finding solutions to serious issues that our country faces, regardless of political affiliation? Mac.
Well, that's the threshold question, and I think really you crystallized it in your usual Jason Stein-like way that so many Americans are concerned about and feel deeply about in their own individual way. And Jason, I wish I had a perfect elevator speech, so to speak, to give, or a silver bullet, to use a cliche there. But I continue to believe that there are a number of factors that are dividing us, including social media, including cable channels, which have their own points of view, including a growing distrust that we've seen in institutions across the board, with the military right now still being at the top of that list. But even there, there's been some decline. But I think when you meet people where they are, and when you see people in their respective cities, communities, states, and working together, there's just so much more in the real world, as Alan Jackson, the country and western singer, would present so enthusiastically. It's just a much more united country than it might seem. But in many ways, I'm not trying to minimize the division. It is real, it is strong, and to date, there's been no one who's quite been able to capture exactly how to make our communities feel more united. I would say that at the state level, and many times at the local level, at the state level where you have a governor, you have a divided legislature with Republicans and Democrats, you see many states, not all, but many states with Democrats or Republican governors that are able to achieve bipartisan consensus, and some governors having approval ratings of 70% plus. So I think that in itself is at least something I would point to give us some encouragement.
Car dealers bring our communities together, whether it's the Little League baseball field or fundraisers or a simple transaction. Give me the state of the retail world from your perspective and the conversations that you have with your family about where the dealer space is today.
Well, the dealer space is very different today than it was 10 years ago. It's very different than it was during the unprecedented and totally unforeseen period during COVID, which was truly a UFO, an unforeseen occurrence. It came out of the sky like a meteor that hit not only our country, but the entire world, and jolted our daily lives and deep concerns about the health and welfare of ourselves and, importantly, our loved ones and friends. And of course, from a business standpoint, including automobile dealers, at first reaction was this could be the big one, as Red Fox used to say on his TV program. This is just something we've never seen. As it turned out, it proved to be a much better period for both dealers and OEMs. And even with the supply chain challenges and frailties that OEMs recognized they had with COVID, they didn't recognize before that to the extent perhaps that they would have liked to. We all worked through that in a rather remarkable way. And I think it goes back earlier to your question about the American people. Just think about people who stood and delivered during that period in critical positions in our hospitals and schools and cafeterias, just on and on and on, that just did remarkable work, including people working in automobile dealerships that had to get up, go to work every day during COVID. This was not a hybrid or stay-at-home job. You have to meet customers where you are. If you're turning a wrench, you got to be there physically to do that. So I think what we're now seeing with our moving through that period, with supply chains now much better back in place, that we're back to the new normalization, kind of the renormalization of the automobile business. Hopefully there were some lessons learned both by dealers and OEMs and others. But I think how you adjust to that with your people, Jason, is a challenge because it's just a big change. It's a big movement in the market. But some things stay very much the same. That is, you mentioned about communities. We talked about that earlier. But the way we look at it, and I think most great dealers are great dealers, and not that I'm saying we're a great dealer, but other dealers that I admire look at it and their people. I think number one, we do serve the community. I think you can't find a successful dealer that doesn't have that commitment in his or her own way. And we could, talk about that forever. The Time Dealer of the Year recognizes that, and so forth. We all do that and feel a real sense of responsibility. But it really goes back, number one, you've got to recruit and take care of your people. You've got to build a culture that supports your people, that makes them feel this is a good place to work and to be there for their career. You've got to really place that as a high priority. Again, I think almost every successful organization does. That goes hand in hand with your customers. Customer perhaps starts first because there's no business without a customer. But the people are with that. And of course, the third is your relationship with your OEM partner. And then you have other important stakeholders, including your lenders and bankers and so forth. So that's the fundamentals of the business. Jason, that has not changed.
Yeah, I agree. You've been ringside and you've been on stage at the Presidio events that we have hosted with some incredibly prominent folks, including President George W. Bush, and with, of course, the leaders of our own retail community. What have you, as you reflect back, what have you learned from those individuals that you take with you on a daily basis in business?
Well, you learn a lot. I mean, I think each of us have a natural tendency, I think, and we try to foster that tendency to observe and learn from people that we admire. I mean, that was certainly just a great part of my growing up in a place called Hope, Arkansas, where I, as a little boy and through high school, saw people conduct their lives, saw people conduct their businesses, including my parents, my father and mother. Those are the examples that you learn from. And they're pretty basic, not to get again on a soapbox, but it starts with really kind of treating others as you would like to be treated. It starts with basic integrity and kindness. And it starts with a work ethic that you're serious about things, and you try to exemplify that, or at least demonstrate that, and find something that you love to do that's a passion. In our business, it's pretty hard to find to find a group that's any more passionate and sometimes colorful than automobile dealers.
That's true. Yeah. A couple of final business questions here. Let's get back to Mack's crystal ball, which I disagree with you. I think it's ultra clear. What does it show in terms of the strength of the consumer as the Fed reduces rates?
Yeah. Well, Chairman Powell has certainly had we'll lend the Higher Wire Act in the Federal Reserve.
Oh, yeah.
And I've had the good fortune to have known Chairman Powell for probably 25 years now, and to serve on the St. Louis Federal Reserve Board well before I came into government. So I've got some appreciation for some of those decisions. And boy, are they qualitative decisions. They may be based on a lot of data and quantitative, but at the end of the day, they are They are how you make those decisions in a very careful, and measured manner. So I think COVID was the big shock to the system, both at the Federal Reserve and in the Congress, and certainly that reflected the country and the world. So I think we've now worked through the inflation where the economy got overheated. We're in the process of working it through, is a better way to say it. The Fed has two mandates: to keep inflation under control at the 2% level or thereabouts, to not erode real wealth in the country, and secondly, to protect jobs, a mandate for jobs, for employment. That's the balance. So far, and it speaks to the car business, Jason, too. I think so far the Fed seems to have avoided a recession. Their policies have helped to avoid a recession. And so far, we've had a rather soft landing to date. That could all change. But you see a big piece of that, of course, is oil prices and gasoline prices at the pump. Low unemployment has been low. Labor participation has been up. And real wages in the last probably year plus have risen. But prior to that, inflation was wiping out those increases and more. So I think that's currently where we are. I think psychologically, the pathway to the rate cuts, which began with 50 basis points, not a quarter, is a psychological factor, as well as a real decrease in rates, which clearly will be a help to our business. So that's kind of how I see the current landscape. But it's still something we need to take one step at a time and be very careful about.
Does affordability concern you? Our first.
It does. It does.
Yeah.
Excuse me, I interrupted you, Jason. Go ahead.
No, our first guest, our great mutual friend Mike Maroney, highlighted this a year and a half ago. Affordability was an enormous problem. Do you still see that to be the way, Mack?
Well, as usual, Mike was ahead of the curve in identifying that trend and describing it in only a way sometimes he can, in a very crisp, clear way. Yes, it is. No, there's no doubt about it. You think back to kind of monthly payments and down payments and how loans were structured as those had been lengthened out over the years. I'm old enough to remember the down payment and 36-month payments, and that's looks pretty quaint these days.
It does, doesn't
it? For sure. But yes, affordability is a real factor, and I think all the OEMs are grappling with that, and that goes back to frankly the competitiveness versus China. Is the competitiveness they have, particularly on electric vehicles. That's a real issue. But for the average person, again, going back to the theme that you and I just talked about, the basic necessity of transportation in your life, people have to have a way to have a car or truck to conduct their lives. And affordability, monthly payments, their ability to make those payments, their well-being, their ability to have a job, and work orders life. And without that pathway and people feeling secure, that's some of, you talked about the division, this anxiety about the future and are we on the right track or wrong track, that all comes into play here. But that leads back to your affordability question. I think all the OEMs, Jason, are just acutely aware of that and are trying to address it and try to manage it as best they possibly can. But it's clearly not easy, particularly coming off an inflationary period.
How involved are you in the business these days, the automotive business? Yeah.
Well, we're involved for sure. As you know, both Mark and Franklin are involved, and they both had great careers. Mark internationally, and some other great things that he's done over his life and career. Franklin the same way, who's been involved in other endeavors in the financial sector, and been chairman of the Arkansas Economic Development Commission. So I'm proud of both of them, but we're involved in it, and with our partnership with Bob Johnson, that's been a real commitment of mine there as well. But it just really lifts you up and makes you feel proud and good and hopeful when you deal with your people of the 4,000 people that we're fortunate to have in our organizations. You want to provide responsible, thoughtful, serious, wise leadership, principled leadership for them and for your family and investors. So that gets you up every day out of bed and gets you to work.
Yeah, I bet it does. I bet. Other projects that you're focused on? What would be the top three that Mack McLarty would be?
Well,
what's on your to-do list?
Yeah, well, it's a lot on my to-do list. You've got the David Letterman top 10 there.
Right.
But I think in terms of projects that are a bit outside the business sector, and I think most dealers, have other interests. Of course, everybody, I think, tries their own way of approaching faith and family and work and trying to order those in the right way. But I think in our case, Donna's in my case, we're getting to that passage where you clearly want to try to recognize the blessings and good fortunes you've had over your lives. And again, we're not unique. There's so many other people who've done that in such an exemplary manner. And certainly in our industry, there's great role models to follow there, examples to follow. But in our case, I think number one, we have the McLarty Scholars, which is kind of the way we try to connect the University of Arkansas. Both Don and I are graduates of the University of Arkansas at Fayetteville. And we had three iconic figures: Sam Walton, the Walton School of Business, the Fulbright College with Senator J. William Fulbright, and the Clinton School of Public Service in Little Rock. Those are three people that I've had the privilege to know and to work with over my life and career. So we can connect that and kind of connect it to Washington and more broadly the international side. That's very meaningful to us. And boy, some of these scholars that are either in undergraduate or graduate school at those schools, and I just mentioned at the University of Arkansas and in those respective schools, they'll light up a room in a hurry. They are impressive, and it makes you feel very proud, but very hopeful about the future. So that, and then Donna's involved in Vital Voices, which is engagement of working with women around the world to empower them, kind of invest in women, improve the world. And it's quite a redeeming venture as well. So those are two things that take up our time and focus, and we're fortunate to have that.
Final question for you, Mack McLarty. Where are you going to be on November 5th?
Well, I haven't made any big plans there. I've been various places on election night that I can remember.
Oh, I bet you have.
not necessarily presidential elections, but other elections, but maybe a presidential election or two as well. But other elections. I don't know physically. Don and I have talked about it briefly. I'm not sure physically where we will be, but we'll be watching carefully and hoping. I think it's going to be a fascinating election, and I'm not sure we'll know. And I've had the opportunity to be on a couple of programs in the past, the hanging chads of the Bush-Gore election.
Oh, sure.
I still remember it vividly. I'm not sure we're going to know election night on November the 5th, Jason, how this one turns out. Right now, it's a very, very close race.
Well, it's become a bit of a tradition. I think I had you on one of my former programs either 4 years ago or 8 years ago, and we talked about what was to come, and we'll have to circle back in the new year and talk about what is.
I like the idea of circling back with Jason Stein anytime. It's great to be with you.
What a pleasure to be with you again. Mack McLarty, thank you so much for being on the program.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks again to my guest, Mack McLarty, and thanks for listening to Full Throttle. Come back to us later in the month for our next interview on this platform. You can email me with suggestions, jstein@thepresidiogroup.com, or you can go to the website, thepresidiogroup.com. Follow us on LinkedIn as well. Thanks for listening to the program. We'll see you next time.